Wow.
She's working on Title IX policy.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
How come Mom and Dad didn't tell me that?
They don't brag on her much. She's number 2 in her class right now.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
That is really
That's
cool.
probably
So you know more than I do. That's great.
that's all.
I love a boat.
You talked to her about this, yeah?
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
I'm sorry.
I'll put this away.
Sure. Hi, Sarah.
Are you sick now, sir?
Cold. It's just for bugs.
I can't navigate, dude.
All right. Lacey, you're good to go. You saw that? Well, Lacey, you're good to go because Liz is here.
Yeah, still good to have.
Cool. I was gonna say, Lacey was like, "Am I taking minutes?" I was like, "Well, no. I think Liz is coming." So
I was looking at practice already.
you do. You can write them in parallel.
Yeah. We'll compare.
We'll give whoever had the better quotables take their minutes.
Sometime within this week.
Just let me know when it's good to go.
Oh, you can go.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
So Jonathan is currently on my computer. He will be on the screen here in a bit. Physically, he's inside of it, so good for him. He's driving back from Wichita conference to go to. So looks like we'll go ahead and jump right into it. Whoa. So last week, just kind of as a recap, which all of you should have gotten the minutes sent out by a couple times, I think. Anyway, so you've got the agenda that I didn't print. So does anybody need that copy? I was going to ask real quick before you go. You want to print one? Yeah, okay. So main topic of discussion last week was the kinesiology and personal financial planning (CTCs). So just kind of as a brief recap of what that discussion looked like. We had a lot of concerns about the fact this was a department-wide fee, the precedent of a department-wide fee being set, ramifications for what could happen next year. I know that some of the wording, which we can discuss. I'm glad Provost Mason is here to discuss this with us. But some of the concern that was expressed is, from a department head about possibility of, quote, the floodgates opening. If we allow, 1 or 2 this year, what would that happen for next year? We have to balance all this, of course, as we discussed last week, with the fact that the CTCs had their discussions and met, and there's a lot of support amongst those college tuition committees for both of these. And on the merits of these proposals, finding a way that we can, I guess, address the merit of the proposal that has been established, or I assume has been established. I don't want to speak for anybody in the room. From the CTCs, but at the same time expressing concern that I think is out there. Once again, don't want to assume is out there about department-wide fees and kind of what that would do. So I know I tossed around a couple solutions or a couple options, I guess, for this committee to do. One of which is look at the adapted fee process, which considers department-wide fees, and basically judge the fee process based on what we saw with the CTCs. Another option was to take 2 votes, where we would basically take a vote on the process. We would also take a vote on the department-wide fee and have this group express its concern on that. Something that I know a couple people in here have had conversations with Dean Buckwalter, and per kind of the end of the meeting when we went out to meet, we've met with Provost Mason. We had a good chat on Friday with her. I know a couple of us, I had an hour and a half long phone call with Dean Buckwalter on Saturday, and then President Myers was also had weighed in this morning. He told me I could share what he had kind of said about this as well. So that's kind of where we're sitting. There's a lot of uncertainty around where we're going to go. And one of the things that got brought up this weekend is a comment from Dean Buckwalter I want to be sure to share as we're evaluating what action this committee shouldn't take. He said, if you don't think that you can vote on a department-wide fee, then don't vote on it, was kind of his point. I think it's kind of an interesting one. We've been thinking, do we vote yes or no based on process or based on, the precedent and the department-wide fee, all those considerations. One option is that if we don't feel that we can adequately, that the process will allow us to have input on a department-wide fee. I'm not trying to wordsmith. I'm just trying to make it clear what I'm saying. That an option would be simply indicating that TFSC makes no recommendation on that fee. So I'll stop talking. I want to hear what everybody has thought about over the last week. You talked to students or you talked to individuals. I know, Trent, you said that you had a conversation, kind of open the floor. And also Provost Mason, I figure, as somebody who wasn't able to be here last week, if you want to give some comments as well, we really appreciate it.
Trenton, can you start? I just thought I would like to speak.
So I talked extensively to Dean Buckwalter, and I guess just found time to think back about it on my own. And I think one of my biggest concerns at last meeting was that along the lines like what you heard at TFSC, that this would encourage a lot of department heads to come forward with individual departmental fees. And I think I've settled down and I have less anxiety about that factor due to a couple of reasons. I think there's got to be trust placed in Provost Mason's, she won't have a replacement, but her predecessor, I guess is the right word, and in individual college deans to filter up proposals that come forward. And I think that deans will take that really seriously. And I think that if we outline a process before next year starts, then that can be proactive about making sure that frivolous fees don't come forward. I also think that, one of the comments that you heard at Faculty Senate was that, well, now if I was a department head, I would have more pressure from my faculty that review me every year to come forward with a fee. And at some point, that person's just not being a great boss if they're simply going to come forward to request money for requesting money's sake. And I think the deans are going to be able to see right through that, and the provost will definitely be able to see right through that if they're simply coming forward for more money. And with how hard it is to get a fee passed, they've got to make a darn compelling case. So I'm a little less anxious about that factor. What my biggest concern now is that we had the conversation about it's both an increase in transparency and a decrease in transparency, to where, yes, students will know exactly what they're paying for and it will be really value oriented. But on the other hand, I don't think the institution's doing enough to let students know about the total fees that they're going to be paying. And you have to think about when students move fluidly from one major to the next. A degree in life sciences compared to a degree in kinesiology compared to a degree in chemie, you're talking thousands and thousands of dollars by the time you achieve a degree in difference of cost due to these fees. And so the fee transparency, I guess, is really the only anxiety that I have left about this moving forward.
Provost, please.
So Trenton and I did not speak since last week, and I do say I apologize I was not able to be here. There were 2 meetings this year that I knew I would miss, and one was last Tuesday. I was speaking to the civil engineering conference that was over probably upstairs or something. Couple of points that I would like to make, and I made these to Faculty Senate leadership, so Brian Linshield has heard this. And if I have this wrong, Jack, please let me know. There didn't seem to be any concern about the process until Jack and Jonathan talked with Faculty Senate. I want to remind you whose committee this is. This is your committee. This is a student committee. And Faculty Senate can give you input, just like Cindy can give you input, I can give you input, but I want to remind you whose committee this is. I think process is really, really important. And if we had been having this conversation 2 months ago before the departmental fee request came forward, we might have said, whoa, we have a whole different beast here. Let's rethink this. Let's take a time out and get a process specifically for departments. Those of you who were sitting at this table, myself included, we didn't do that. I didn't even think about it. Quite honestly, I came from a college at my previous institution where we had one department that had a fee and the other 8 departments did not. And so it never really kind of hit me as being odd that we are having this discussion. So this is your committee. Certainly getting input from Faculty Senate is important, but I want you to be sure to know that you're not compelled to do what Faculty Senate has to say. Sorry, Brian. But here's really where I don't take it personally, but we're getting close. You did not see all of the fee requests that came forward to me in this committee because I said, working with the dean, I said, that's just kind of silly what you're proposing there. You haven't made a good point. I don't think it's appropriate, and let's not waste TFC, you know what I mean, Tuition and Fee Strategies Committee's time. So there's a gatekeeper, and I think what Trenton just said is absolutely right. That's why I said we haven't talked. You have a dean that will get input from their department heads. They can stop it at any point. And then the dean has to give it to the provost. I won't be here, you know that, but there will be a provost. And they can say yes or no. And then you have a vote. So if we were having this conversation 2 months ago, I'd be all in saying, let's get a decision on departmental fees. But we didn't. And you have 2 departments, a department and a section within a department that have whole scale supported a fee. So the last thing I will say is something that Brian and we talked about this afternoon with Faculty Senate. The new budget model that we're putting in place is going to be based on student credit hours and majors. We know that for sure. There may be other parts, but for sure it's going to be associated with student credit hours and majors. So you will be compensated or given money to the colleges in relationship to the number of majors and student credit hours you generate. Some of you know that engineering has not gotten quite as much as they'd like for the student credit hour increase. Ag has not gotten as much as they'd like from central administration because we didn't really have a way to do it, but we're putting one together. And it's going to be based on student credit hours and majors. So if a department, a college, or anybody raises their fees too high, we would anticipate their enrollment would go down, in which case they would be penalized in our new budget modernization process. So I think there are checks and balances here. You have deans, you'll have a provost, and people are not wanting to put huge numbers of fees on students because there will potentially be an enrollment effect. But when the effect comes, it's going to be on that unit and they'll get fewer resources from central administration because their enrollment potentially will go down. And this is all hypothetical because we don't know. So I really hate to penalize 2 units, a department and a section of a department that did what we asked them to do, voted, and to go back on that, I struggle with. I really do.
So I'm not a voting member, but let me share that. I'd say that faculty fee is not totally, against, the fee. There are some vocal people, that definitely have concerns. But I've talked to Dean Buckwalter as well. I think that having a little bit more context. I looked at the fee schedule, to give me some sense. There are, some program fees and things on there. Is the fee schedule horrendous? Yes. It's a horrendous number of fees on it. I don't know that these 2 are drastically going to shift that. Complexity, I guess, and things, is partly where I was kind of looking at or what I was thinking through. But this group's going to have to kind of think through, where you're at on that. But
Sergeant Jordan has been called out because this may be a call to the next committee under Jordan's leadership to think about how you want to deal with this. But to change the rules in the middle of the game seems odd.
And I think so. just a couple other comments, just kind of get caught up from, I guess, conversation of the last week. Two things I think that come to mind. One as another challenge, and one as a potential solution. The other challenge, I guess, is that with all respect to what the discussion about the importance of that flexibility, and with what we talked about last week, how there's two sides to the coin of transparency. The one side is knowing exactly where your dollars are going, and that's accomplished very well by department-wide fees. And then the other side of the coin for transparency, of course, is knowing upfront what you would pay. And so I think that is my challenge, both one, my personal challenge, and then probably more importantly, just a challenge that I feel the need to bring up as the chair of the committee, is that when we put together a tuition fee structure working group that met all for the last year, is one that Trent served on, and then when Trent and Jessica had ended their terms, when I served on, and the group did a lot of research and called a lot of different universities and said, how do we best make our tuition fees structures transparent, and how do we make sure, basically that accomplish the goals we're talking about, very much the same goals in here. And the conclusion they came to was to take all college and even course fees, eliminate all fees altogether, and take whatever that total revenue was produced in a college through a course fee, through college-wide fees, and loop them up into it, basically just a true differential tuition model where you pay higher tuition. So I know there's challenges with that and everything, but it's just, I guess my challenge, to be candid, is that I'm worried about how those are two different directions, pretty much the two ends of the spectrum. And I think there's, unfortunately, I think there's merit to both. I don't think there is a right answer. And I guess that's kind of where I was sitting. The other thing is something we talked about as a solution when we met with Provost Mason on Friday was is that in 2014, the tuition fee, well, I think it was actually what we had at the time was a University Budget Advisory Committee, created a subcommittee that was chaired by the student body president and by the faculty senate president to look at how we can assess college fees. It was one of the tenets of this subcommittee. And so my comment to, I think it was kind of a group discussion in this meeting with Provost Mason on Friday, was what if we created a subcommittee next year that would do just that for department fees? Because right now, the application says college-wide fees, things like that. We need to go in, regardless of what happens, that's going to be my big recommendation to Jordan, is that one way or another, we do need to figure out some new, even if it's just changing a couple words. I think that if the application is going to be for a department, that needs to be reflected in there. So that was kind of something that, whether or not that changes the course of action this year or not, that is in fact something I would recommend. So, Steve.
I just went online. I'm sorry I wasn't at the meeting last week. I went to Layla Ireland, that speech. But if we're talking about how easy it is for people to figure out how much they're going to pay at the university, I just Googled tuition and costs. And I know that we've talked about how we can make it easier for people to figure out how much they would pay coming to school here. It's not easy at all, because up here you have tuition and fees, one for Manhattan campus, one for Polytechnic campus, and then you have on-campus housing, off-campus housing, additional costs, and then all the way down here you have the department fees. So I've heard us talk, so first of all, I think we're talking about how can we make tuition, total cost of attendance more accessible to people, which is impacted by department costs, but it might be two separate conversations. But then I've also heard us talk about how we can make it easier for people to understand what they would pay coming here. And with a lot of talk in 3 years, this is even more confusing than anything I can remember. So just a simple calculator on a site saying, what's your major going to be? How many hours are you planning on taking? What's the total cost of your degree? What's your cost per semester? Where are you going to live housing-wise? That sort of site, I don't know how easy it is to build, but this is not accessible right now.
So I think Steve has a good point. Perhaps there's work that needs to be done absent of the fee discussion. I think that's.
But work does need to be done.
Point. Yeah, we'll take it. Those who haven't talked, what's going on? Ryan, I know you're going to talk. I'm going to put you on the spot, but
Yeah, I
give some
mean,
good feedback.
I mean, Provost Mason, I think, really hit the nail on the head about what we kind of talked about. And I printed off kind of the proposal that TFSC put forward at the beginning of the semester. I specifically kind of want to read off what TFSC reviews of the CTC. And that is that students were informed on the need of the increase, including the context of existing tuition revenues and other revenue streams for the college, and that students could ask questions, and those questions were answered by the dean. When we're talking about these two fees, I don't see in this new process that we can look at these kind of macro level issues. I understand the need for next year to be able to put these proactive measures in place, right, with the next committee, but I think that right now, these two fees, we don't have any justification to say that the process was not followed.
So, that's a good point on that. The only thing I would follow up with on that is I do think this committee still has a responsibility to determine. I think this committee does have a role in macro level. Now, I totally hear you on what you're saying about how that is perhaps not appropriate to determine if the process is followed or not. But I don't want to pigeonhole ourselves to the point where we can't could we discuss tuition? We discuss, tuition and fees strategies. I would say a tuition and fees strategy is whether or not we're going to do department-wide fees. So that's well within our purview, and that's something that Dean Buckler and I went back and forth on the phone. I respect him for that. I respect you for saying that. I just was going to want to have that up there as well. But I hear what you're saying about the process.
Kind of another thing that I just thought of it at the beginning of this meeting, so I haven't had a time to process all of it. I'm not even sure exactly what my thoughts are, but something I do want to bring up is that in this, we talk about having representatives for the entire college. Obviously, when we looked at these department fees, we just had members from that specific department. They're still members of the college. They still, I think, technically would meet this criteria. But when we're evaluating those department fees, do we still want to have representatives from the entire college across other departments giving feedback of, are they okay with one department in their college? I'm not sure how big of an issue that is, or if that's opening another can of worms. So that's just something I'm sitting here thinking of. Because if we're calling it a college tuition committee, it was technically a department tuition committee.
And that's why I think that one way or another, we've got to have, we need to figure out an actual process for this next year and not just modify what we have. I don't think that's fair to this committee or the departments that are affected.
I just want to walk back one of my earlier comments. We do have a calculator, definitely needs some improvements, but it's not easy. It could use some improvement.
Other thoughts? What is that?
Miranda, trying to think about what you were saying about department. I think it does depend on the context of the department asking, because let's say you have the math department coming forward, where a lot of different, where it's a class that might be taken by students across the college. I think then that would be important. But knowing personal financial planning, it's not something that's and I think human ecology is an exception to every college, because they have such unique and siloed programs that there's probably not a lot of classes that you take across the board. I think if you in English or math or bio or chem were to come forward, it'd be really important for that all college representation, because a lot of students in the college take those classes, if that makes sense. But and obviously in the College of Business, we would want everyone there, because there's only how many course prefixes. Everyone takes a certain amount of hours in every department. So I think it'll depend, which is why the process probably needs to be outlined really well.
So something that the point President Myers made was that last year, which is not, I want to share this. I think it's a good point. That last year, Dean Buckwalter proposed a college-wide fee that did not get accepted by the committee, so it didn't go forward. And then, this would essentially be the second year of asking for a fee with, demonstrated need for said fee that would not go forward. But That said, a third or another kind of idea that I've heard kind of get tossed around from a number of people, a faculty senator said it this morning. It's something that Jonathan and I have talked about as well, and we've, I guess, heard it from a number of different places, is the idea of, whether you want to call it a moratorium or just simply hitting pause for this year solely on department fees. It's something that we talked about this morning. President Myers thought we were talking about engineering fees. We're being very clear. It would just be on the department fees. Basically say, let's hammer out a process. Let's charge a committee. Jordan and Spencer, or Dr. Wood, who's the incoming faculty senate president. Let's charge a committee and figure out what exactly what that process should look like, what the application looks like, who we need to hear from, things like that, and then come back to the next year with that process. Now that delays a year. There's consequences to that. There's consequences to everything we do. Is the unfortunate reality. But wanted to throw that out there as well. Jonathan, I know you can't hear us super well. Is there anything you wanted to say? I hear you stirring.
Yeah, I just made it home, so I'll be getting on news here in a minute.
Good deal.
Yeah, I really don't have much to add right now.
Sounds good.
I'm glad there's been a lot of people getting involved in the conversation.
Yeah, Jack, I hear what you're saying there, and from the article that was in the Collegian, the floodgates opening, that would affect the floodgates if that's a big concern. Penalizing the 2 units that came forward this year is still my main concern. And Jordan, we talked about this a little bit when you were out of the room. I think it really would be important to bring a task force together. The composition of that task force, certainly up to you. I'll remind you what my first point was. This is your committee. Faculty Senate, maybe working with Cindy's office to have financial information might be very helpful, and I think that's very important. And Julie Keene coordinated the committee the last time we had it, and it was, I thought, very effective and a great conversation.
Right.
And I think I said to you last Friday afternoon, I'm kicking myself that I didn't think of it. None of us thought of it a couple months ago.
It'd be a different story if we were talking about this in January.
Absolutely.
I think if we're talking about wanting to make sure the floodgates don't get opened or whatever we're talking about, I think this will be important in the transition of the provost position as well. Saying what your work has been to maybe move some of those fees that maybe, I'm not going to say, I try to repeat what you tried to say, but like dissuade some fees as opposed to the ones that you went through.
So the president and I have talked numerous times, and Jack was on the committee, and Brian was on the committee, and Pat was on the committee. When the provost is named, we already have a plan for a transition, so that this kind of information doesn't, get in the car and leave with me. It's this kind of information. Cindy has it, Dr. Bosco has it, I have it, and it's transitioned to a new provost, because that's very important. I take that real seriously, Stephen.
Yes, I think.
You should ask that question.
Sorry, I was swallowing. When will the new provost be named?
Potentially next week.
Okay.
We're hopeful.
Yeah.
These things take an inordinate amount of time, much longer than you ever think possible.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
don't hold me to that, but I heard rumor that we
I
might
can
know next
confirm
week.
that I heard from a good source.
It wasn't me. Which gives us time. I'm not leaving until the end of June, so it gives us time.
Another thing to consider is just, like I said, I'm sorry for talking a lot, and I don't mean to keep being a derailer or derailment, but just want to keep adding stuff to the fire conversation. Is that one of the reasons why that group is going to be important looking into next year is because there's currently there's not a process for this. Like, so we've adapted an existing process. The challenge is, and this is something we haven't really discussed, but if fee revenue is less than $250,000, it does not have to go to the Board of Regents for an approval process, similar to the way our college fees do. Now, that doesn't comment on, and I think that Jordan had a good point earlier. I'm going to use your quote that, regardless of the overall dollar amount that it generates, it doesn't change the dollar amount that it charges the students. Now, the point on that is one of the things we haven't talked about is that process at a university level, because, and Provost may correct me if I'm wrong, but, and I know we haven't really had much of a conversation about this, but we're appreciative that this was brought to us this year. I mean, that's, and all this, I want to be clear on that. The alternative is not, I would not like the alternative of it just simply not going to TFSC, but figuring out how to do that in such a way that is important both internally. We continue to respect the shared governance approach that we take to setting fees, but also this is a comment I've received that this concern to how this impacts K-State when it comes to our relationship and reputation with cable and the legislature. We don't want to appear as if we are trying to manipulate or work around the system. And I don't think there's any intention to do that from anybody. This group, dean, provost, president, whoever. But perception is important, and I think that maintaining adherence to process is important for that reason as well. So we talked big picture.
So
micro level, any other? Yeah, go ahead.
Are the next steps to vote on process for both fees?
Individually, yeah. So I think, and that's, I'm trying to figure out how to, if we are all on the same page. Like I said, I don't want to assume that we want to talk about the fee process, and if approving the fee means that we take it forward to President Myers just as we would any other fee, that's the role of the group. So I guess just asking that, the next couple minutes, this committee is going to be, or next couple, hopefully, minutes of this committee are going to be critical to figure out exactly what we're voting on. Because if, there's individuals that are concerned about the department-wide fee, situation, I don't want that to get lost in a motion, essentially. So I guess if I could take kind of a straw poll, where's everybody sitting in regards to passing this just like any other fee, thereby creating a department-wide fee? I guess thumbs up if you're okay with that. Thumbs down if you're not. So thumbs up if you're okay with passing a fee, with approving the process, which would create a fee just as any other fee. Not concerned too much about the department-wide issue versus. So we're kind of split.
Wait, so I guess if you're a no and you don't think process was followed.
No, that's
not it.
That's not it. So James, what's your
speak. My concern, I guess, is just that, is kind of what's already been said. Opening the floodgates, I am not sure that most of my reservations have already been said. It like you said, Jack, it creates greater transparency in a way, but then it also inhibits transparency in other ways. So I'm reluctant to create that precedent of 120, and it might not be 120 every year, but it will be a large amount. And without a process in place, I do not believe that we should go ahead and create that precedent. That said, I think, well, I'm kind of walking back now. That said, I do believe that we should pass these two fees and that the process was followed, with the caveat putting out a statement or voting on something else that we do not necessarily approve of departmental fees.
Does that sound like a motion, maybe?
It could.
Like,
not really. I want to hear other people's reasons for.
Yeah, so on that, James, I'm definitely with you. I think I'm in support of saying that the process was followed for these fees. And I will add, it's kind of funny, my 2 roommates, one of them is PFP, one of them is kinesiology.
How much pressure did they put on you?
So I've talked to both of them extensively about it. Kind of talked them through what our conversations have been. And there is the student support there. It's kind of hard to deny that. So I'm definitely with you there. I feel like I would be more in favor of a recommendation more so than a vote, to say that, I don't know.
Vote to make a recommendation.
So 3 votes. The process was followed on both of these.
Yes.
Sorry, no. So and then putting out a recommendation, but we recommend that departmental fees not be brought to us in the future.
I don't know if that's where I'm at, because I really like what Provost Mason said about being a gatekeeper, right?
That's true.
And we talk about the floodgates a lot, and I think that those things are kind of go hand in hand with that
Right,
analogy, right? But I think that this separate process for the department fees, but then also maybe this is a conversation I have with Jordan about next year, but about reinforcing that gatekeeper mechanism, knowing that we'll have a different provost in that position, would be my preference for a recommendation.
Sure.
It will be interesting to watch a new provost navigate both TFSC in general, but then the new precedent of now department-wide fees being a thing. So Jordan, good luck with that.
I was going to, now that I'm getting thrown into all of this, is there anything necessarily stopping us from waiting until the new provost is announced and throwing them into the mix as well? Because my fear is that doing whatever we do tonight, whether it's passing on the process basis, giving a recommendation, whatever it is moving forward, we're then tying the hands of the new provost with whatever that recommendation is.
I think my concerns are similar to that, in that I'm worried about passing this and saying that we did it wrong, but they slipped by, and that next year we wouldn't let this happen, or would, or further conversation. That's not fair to the students who are in these programs to say that, oh, like they got us, here's your fee.
Let me try to respond to you, Jordan. I know this is really, really important to all of us. When a new provost is named, there are going to be a million things that person is involved in. And we might say that this is the most important thing, but physically, I don't think they would probably be here until July 1, maybe August 1. I think it will be difficult to wait.
Yeah.
You can say, you are not setting a precedent. Maybe you have a moratorium later, or you have a process later that is more fitting, and you have a discussion with the new person. But to say that there's this support, but you're not going to pass it because we weren't ready for the process, that's what I'm struggling with. And I don't think a new provost would come in and have the nuances of this. I'm still getting it, by the way. It's complex. So
and I wasn't trying to say not to pass based on process or the merits of the fee. I think more so making a decision on our perspective or university perspective on departmental fees, and making that without the context of who is going to be here.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood you. That I think is well said, because then you can get a group together and have lots of discussion about it and not put pressure.
Could we do something like a temporary installment of the fee, that with the condition that it will be reviewed under the new process, whatever that is? That would be obviously hard for budget planning of the department, but that would give us the ability to, when we come up with a process that we all agree on, to go back and look at it through that process.
I think it's a good idea. I think that's our next agenda item, right? So, but in all seriousness, though, I think that there's some merit to that, because you could say essentially that this will be reviewed in the next fiscal year, comes automatically.
I think there are 3 things I think we can get most people to agree on maybe. Process was followed. not taking a position on departmental fees and maybe stating that specifically, and then tasking a work group for next year to talk about departmental fees and the way that we market cost of attendance.
And as a reminder, I think three comments. One, all of our decisions are contextualized by the report, which is important. I'm going to most definitely talk about how we've gone around the block, gone around the country, if you will, on the conversation department fees. So that, two, meeting with President Myers, a wonderful new tradition, I think, for kind of presentation of that report. And then three, he's aware of our difficult discussion. But yes, Stephen, I agree with you. My only challenge, Brenda, as I'm thinking through logistically what that would look like with the review, is that, and I think we'll have to talk more about that here in a couple minutes, but if all checks out, I guess according to plan, logistically, I know there's been a chat about not starting a new CTC or DTC, whatever you want to call it, every year, but that's not necessarily set in stone. So I think there's a lot of merit in that idea of yours. And I think there's going to need to be some discussion, and this is probably a comment that Cindy and Provost Mason can comment on, but that with a new with a new budget model, now I think we got to keep in mind, just because it's a new model doesn't mean there's new money. That would be nice.
Yes.
As if with a new budget model we had an additional, $8 or $10 million, that'd be awesome. But
we didn't buy that package.
What's that?
We didn't buy that.
You didn't buy that? That's too bad. But with that, I think there's going to need to be review, because the landscape has shifted. I mean, the land's going to shift one way or another. Fee, no fee, increase, decrease, whatever. Everything. I mean, I will spare everybody my moving target analogy with a marksman, but I mean, just keep in mind. So, all right. Other discussion points. I mean, I know we're nearing a vote, so I don't want to beat a dead horse, as I know this committee is very sensitive too.
Yeah, I don't know. I just say that I kind of struggle with the idea of the 1 year review. It kind of feels like a yes but kind of motion, and I don't know. I feel like it kind of undermines the point of even saying yes in the first place. Personally, I don't see the justification for why we would do that necessarily. If we're willing to say that the process was followed for these department fees, then how are we willing to say, well, it was kind of followed? Does that make sense?
Because the process was flawed.
Yeah, but in the future, if we do have
I think it was
departmental
kind of
fees, I feel like fees
Yeah.
need to hold up to whatever standards we set for those new departmental fees. And so that's why I feel that there would need to be a review of fees to meet those standards, so that everyone across the board had the same set of standards when they're putting in departmental fees in place. Makes sense.
So you're talking about the review for fees?
For next year,
Okay,
or when we
gotcha.
come up with a
New
new
proposal.
departmental process, I feel like whatever departmental fee is at our university needs to have lived up to that process. That's why I feel it.
Challenge, of course, is that you can't. I mean, you got to build up some dollars and have searches and stuff, and that can't happen right away. But you do it. Just final thoughts, final discussion. I have pretty well captured the thoughts on departmental fees. I struggle with it personally. Like I don't know. I'll be honest in saying just kind of my thoughts, like the way I'm going to vote. So I'm not surprised when I say it. Is I think that Dean Buckwalter had outlined a good position, which is that I don't feel like we can. I say this not to sway any opinion, just to simply say, here's why I'm voting. I'm going to abstain because that's not voting. I know that's a cop out usually, but I feel like I can't vote no on the fee because I think there's been sufficient merit showed. But I'm having trouble voting yes because I think that I don't feel like the process was truly followed.
Wait, so I don't understand why that constitutes why that constitutes an abstention from the vote.
Because
is there a conflict of interest present?
Yeah, I know you're abstaining. I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm just having. I just am really having trouble voting yes. With.
So,
all that.
I think above all else,
it's okay if you. I mean, that's just me. Who cares? But I'm just saying.
I don't think we can overcomplicate this because I think so department-wide fees have never been a thing, and now they're apparently at least a topic of conversation. And so, I don't. It doesn't make sense to me to vote no on the department fee when the department did everything they thought they needed to do, and the students, in my mind, we break a lot of trust with students that, let's be honest, we're already skating on thin ice most of the time. And that becomes even more skinny when we go against and what was it, 10-0 and 1 and
13-0, 11-2.
That just makes me unhappy.
I think the question is what the motion is. I think the question is, was the process followed as was outlined by the committee this year? I'm not a voting member, but I would say yes. And I can't wait until we talk about how we might change this process going forward, because I think that there does need to be a place where the tuition fee strategies makes a comment on how does this impact our land grant affordability? How does it voting on things such as do we think department fees are good? I think there is more complexity that TFSC brings to the process, but at the beginning of this year, it was decided that TFSC would vote largely just on process. So if it's just a process motion, then I think they followed it. But if you start voting on department fees, have fun. That's going to be a lot of fun.
I have a question. This might have been asked already, but Provost Mason, was there any other department? I know engineering brought all the departments forward, and then was community ecology the only one that also brought a department fee forward? I guess another question, this might have been brought up, but I'm trying to rack my brain. Did Dean Buckwalter, or did anyone ask if Dean Buckwalter, were all departments within community ecology made aware that they could, take these forward?
They were. So he was the first gatekeeper.
Yeah.
He discussed it with his department heads. Then he brought 3 forward. I brought 2 to you.
Then I think that's just an important thing to know, because that's what I was thinking, but we hadn't mentioned that much tonight, is if all departments were aware.
They were.
Bosco.
I remember when we just had tuition discussions, and privilege fee was really a student activity fee. It was the only fee students paid. It was mandatory. Then we had really years of discussion whether we were going to expand our privilege fee for a lot of different activities that were outside the student activity fee definition. And it took, really the question was the university ready? Was the university ready to move into this new arena? And I sense the conflict you're having is that the question maybe ought to be, is the university ready to open the door for departmental fees? Whether yes or no, and that ought to be, I think, the bigger discussion. You talked about the big picture. I don't think I've been around a discussion so conflicting than the one you're having now. And maybe it's because we need to have a discussion whether we want to open the door to this new way of helping us fund our university. And that needs, I think that's the question you're wrestling with. And whether a college or a department went ahead and jumped the gun, or they followed the process or not, you really have the obligation to answer the bigger question, or at least make a recommendation, the bigger question. Is the academy ready to have a process in place that moves away from college, or in addition to college fees, individual department fee discussions? And how you frame that? That would be a bigger issue.
And I think we've been trying to address that, Dr. Bosco, saying that that's important, that Jordan and others put a process together. Essentially, without consciously doing it, we answered that question when we brought 2 departmental fees forward. We didn't ask the question. We inadvertently didn't ask the question. I think it's really important to do what you're saying. Absolutely. We're doing it post facto. And do we hold these 2 programs essentially hostage because of that? Because we missed it for whatever reason.
To go off Provost Mason's comments, like, I think in a lot of ways this would hurt kinesiology if we didn't move forward with this. But from the presentation and from the rationale that I got from PFP, I don't think by delaying it 1 year we would be holding them hostage. I think maybe in some ways we would be really inhibiting / theoretically holding kinesiology hostage, but I don't think that's the case with PFP. Because we talked about dire need, and I think everyone can agree that there was very little dire need. There was no classes getting, there was no, I didn't see the dire need. So I don't know. They're in 2 different spots.
We have kind of put them together.
Yeah.
But maybe perhaps that's
I felt like the kinesiology was a lot greater need.
Oh, kinesiology was a great feed. I mean, that's what you said. This is the best feed presentation I've seen.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
But isn't our role, is it your role as TFSC to look at process and follow the same process? And
because if we start going down that role of voting on more than process, there are things I'd love to go back and talk about other fees about.
Yeah, I knew it. Touche.
Jack's got a tattoo on his back, right?
I do agree. The issue is the tattoo is going to cost $25 a credit hour to get. I just can't. Yeah, sorry. I know. All right. It is hot in here. James. I was gonna say, James, where you said? I think as somebody who had.
I was gonna make a motion.
Okay, cool.
I don't care if you're right here now. I move that this committee approve that the process was followed for the kinesiology fee.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any other discussion?
Come on, Brett, say it.
Say it, Brett.
I'm uncomfortable.
1, 2.
Yeah.
My biggest question, are we gonna have any other votes that will show other thoughts that are going on in this room right now?
Yeah, I feel like we should figure out what motions we want to put forward.
Yeah, because I don't know
Yeah.
how,
Because
determine how I vote.
So we have process is correct.
Because I don't want so I'm in the boat right now where I want to I don't want to vote no on because the process question truly yes that process was followed, but it's I don't think you should exercise other thoughts based on that.
I think my opinion is to have the vote at hand, and then the membership we can steer the conversation however we want after the vote.
And there can always be more motions considered.
Yeah, and you have a lot of time until the recommendation too.
Yeah, it's on the agenda if time allows.
Cindy says I did not.
To the process.
Cindy says disagree.
No, I'm thinking of other things. You move ahead.
All right.
Yours?
Does that help?
Yeah, my third. Let's go.
I don't have a spot for that.
Yes.
Jonathan?
Jonathan, what's up?
I'll come back then.
I'll call.
Moreland,
Yes.
Pruitt,
Yep.
Moore,
Yes.
Kennedy,
Yes.
Maples,
Yep.
Kelly,
Yes.
Kemp,
Yes.
Montague.
Yeah.
Prince.
Yes.
1 second.
Can you record that?
Can you record that?
Congratulations, yes. Yes.
He's saying
He goes to
now.
Yes.
Jonathan says yes to kinesiology process. And he adds, you bet.
Let's keep a rock and roll.
Motion passes 11 to 0.
All right. Further discussion about PFP. I think Trey hit the nail on the head. As my personal opinion, the merits of kinesiology are much stronger than the merits of PFP, but I'm not sure there's any difference in the process.
Yeah, the process.
If I was writing a recommendation, I would. This is politically incorrect. I would roast PFP because I felt like.
Yeah. Sorry,
I think
go ahead.
I think a lot of us had problems, not just with the proposal, but with the circumstance in which that section finds themselves in. But that's a topic for the recommendation and for that.
Well, so give me some, like, what's tangibles? Like, what's the?
I just felt like so since I've been on here since freshman year, the
7 or 8 years.
yeah. Like our sticking point was always dire need because we were tacking on these fees 4 to 5% to 6% tuition increases, and so we were constantly looking at dire need. Like all I heard from this was like a maintenance of excellence.
Process.
Yeah, so
Process.
that's why, like, I think our vote will probably be the same on process. But what hurts is that we've been bound by committing to process. I mean, it will just be the strength of our recommendation. But I already said I don't think you were here for this, Provost Mason, but President Myers went against TFSC's recommendation and put forward an engineering fee.
Correct.
Now, there will be he won't have any reason not to put PFP forward because there will be an 11-0 vote, if that makes sense. And so although I think we're bound to vote yes because the process was followed, I don't know if there's any footing for them not to put the fee forward.
So I agree with that. My only comment is that I do think that President Myers is sensitive to
the recommendation.
Recommendation, but more importantly, at equal importance, sensitive to increasing cost. And I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think if he didn't find value, now I think he probably finds value as it derives through the process. But anyway,
He's really the ultimate gatekeeper.
Right.
Yeah. Truly. I mean, you make a report to him, he could say, I'm not following this. Probably not his best political move, but
right.
And we struggled last year when he took it for the engineering fee forward. Really struggled.
We revised it.
And we revised it.
Because we felt
your input was so important. So
I think it's important, even if we vote on process and we don't vote on anything else, that we make it very clear what specifically our concerns are with each of these fees, so that it's put into a report to be conveyed on. I'm not going to get into the whole discussion of whether or not we should have another vote because it could be warranted. But I think we need to make sure we have all the points written in the report and all the points communicated to the president, because these are not issues that are just unique to this year. Departmental fees, land grant affordability versus excellence, dire need, all these things, they're consistent from year to year.
Well, and I think that's a great point. I think the other point is like that wording, I think will be important to talk to both deans and, with Provost Mason. I'm sorry, we keep talking about your job, but with, that is, as an important, I think that there needs to be a good discussion, I guess, into how into the dire need. And is that, what does that mean? Is that valuable? Sorry, that statement meant nothing. But I think that you're bringing that forward. I think just kind of, if that's the lens we want to apply, that's probably a pretty good lens. So, anyways.
Kind of a question. It kind of goes back to what Trent was mentioning earlier about the PFP fee. Is it like within our purview to make a recommendation about the merits of proposals? Because I don't think that, obviously TFSC, that's not our role, but does the CTC, do they have any room for recommendations? You know what I mean?
Right. Well, that's a good point. I hear you. The comment, though, is ultimately we record 2 votes. And I don't think it does an 11-0-0 vote justice if I don't talk about
the merit,
how that was led to. Yeah. So I'm not talking about merit. It's this is roundabout, and I'm not trying to school you, but I will talk about the discussion that took place here, which is how we got to our vote on the process and the discussion. If that goes into concerns about merits, then it goes into concerns about merits, even if that's not legitimate. So here's why we got to the thing. Even because that was not our deciding factor.
Okay.
But it sure was part of the conversation. And we'll have a drafting phase. If I'm way off on that, we'll address that. I hear what you're saying. I don't want to have a bunch of TFSC thoughts when that's not what the point of TFSC is. But, yeah. Sorry, Jonathan, text me. All right. Anyways, as for our next discussion. So, yes.
Just a thought, because this is a new process that was introduced this year as far as giving the colleges and those students the input or the vote. One of my concerns was how that was going to affect this committee, exactly what you're talking about, because you've always discussed merits regardless of the college. And so there may be some value in just reviewing and looking back on how did the process work.
And with this process this year, it's not like we actually have an official document about what the process was this year. It's not like we ever finally decided what it would look like. We voted on an idea as it was discussed in committee. So ideas can always be changed too.
We don't have a document?
Well, I thought we did have a document that from the committee.
Did we have a final draft? Did we have a final draft, or what did we vote on an idea?
For sure.
So I print it off.
But you may want to.
Yeah,
How will it
exactly. Ideas can always be changed.
And that's our third agenda item today. I was going to say, we can all done. Is there a
PFP?
No, I know. I'm sorry. I was just being facetious. Is there a motion for PFP?
I move we approve the PFP, follow the process.
Second.
Move in seconds or any other discussion?
Ayers,
Yes.
just ask JP, please.
You said, sorry.
Will,
Yes.
Nate,
Yeah.
Miranda,
Yes.
Trent,
Yes.
Wilson,
Yes.
Ryan,
Yes.
Julia,
Yes.
Brett,
Yes.
James.
Yes. Jonathan says yes.
Motion passes 11-0.
He says yes twice.
I only count you once, Jonathan.
Okay, so I guess now we're kind of back to our discussion. And I do think before we move on to our next agenda item, it is important to talk about, are there any other kind of official things action we want to take in regards to the fees about department-wide fees, things like that. I sense the room is probably divided in terms of people that vote yes or no. I think that the room's also divided internally. I'm very divided internally because I think, like I said, I see merit to the transparency that happens as a result of both alternatives. Something that happened last year that I thought was important was that we voted to officially put in our recommendation when we voted on tuition. So last year we said we vote for a 3% tuition increase, or maximum of 3% tuition increase, and this additional motion that the university prioritize needs-based scholarships, which gave Stephen some fuel for his fire, which is a great fire, and that was in the recommendation. President Meyer said that to the Board of Regents. I mean, that was an important recommendation. So I think something we can, I'd like to, whether it's I think a motion would be valuable, is to hit on the head what Stephen was talking about with transparency and making it more accessible, regardless of department-wide fee or not. I think there's still some challenge with this with our current structure of college and course fees, is to designate either a group with this, or I think that's up to the next year to figure out exactly how you go about that. But to guarantee that it's easier for students to determine their total cost of attendance.
So here was my idea, was that we continue, and ultimately, yes, this is up for the next committee to decide, but we continue the process where we vote on process, right? So currently like it is now. But then as a committee, we draft recommendations together based on, like, the reservations that Trent had about the PFP fee. That is tough to say. So we have discussions and we make a recommendation together as a committee to President Myers. We put this in a written document that we drafted together as a committee. What would that look like?
Help me out.
For individual fees like this. So now as the process stands, we can disagree with the fee as much as we want, but we can't do anything about it because we're just voting on process. So what if we do have reservations like Trent does, and frankly I do, about the PFP fee? So in a way, we've kind of been neutered in a little bit that we can't really talk about. So I'm just saying, in that we can't really say whether or not we agree with the fee in and of itself. So I think that probably needs to be addressed, and that would also kind of resolve what Stephen was talking about a little bit.
That was the point of forming the CTCs, wasn't it? Just that it should be up to the.
And we're not taking that away from them at all. It's just that we would also, after sitting in on the CTCs, we would also be able to kind of add our recommendation to that.
So then every fee has a perspective of the people it affects and student leadership process.
Yes. Yeah.
That's what we struggled with the engineering fee. There was a lot of us who had struggles with the merits of it, but we couldn't change our vote because technically the profit was false.
Yeah, so, exactly.
But I agree with that.
But sorry.
No, you're good. Go ahead.
In the engineering fee, there were even students who felt bound by the fee because of the need they face, because of the difference in the need they faced and felt and what the fee actually addressed. And I guess that gives me more confidence here that in kinesiology and in PFP, there was very little disparity between what they wanted and what the fee was giving them, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think an interesting perspective is that we're giving it to the students to make their vote. They're the ones that are affected. And also, I know I brought this up to Jack, those deans could have handpicked those students and told them, this is what we need, this is what you should vote. Because there was not really a separation between. Because it's like we had groups come in and they knew exactly what they wanted. They knew everything about the fee before they even stepped into the room.
And these departments, I got the sense that they weren't really looking big picture affordability. They were just kind of laser focused on their department. Whereas it's kind of the purview of this committee. We talk big picture, right? So I think that a recommendation that we write as a committee could be a really appropriate vehicle when it goes up the ladder.
So I agree. We're talking process now.
Process.
Yeah.
I want to
go back and make sure there's not unfinished business on.
Sorry.
Sorry, I should have put it. I want to make sure there's not unfinished business on the department-wide fee.
Oh, no, I'm just
Okay,
saying,
cool.
I
I
can't wait to talk about the
No, you're good.
process,
Sorry, I
because
should have been.
everything you're all saying.
I should have been more clear on that. So is there interest in formally recommending the creation of a subcommittee to evaluate how to evaluate department-wide fees?
So I think department-wide fees, and then either in that group or some sort of a recommendation for somebody going forward is, how are we trying to make total cost of attendance more accessible to students? Because I think there are improvements to the process being made. I don't know if that's a recommendation to a cabinet position, or if that's something that a work group committee can look at as well.
One of the things that we're working on with the Huron group on strategic enrollment management is just that. How do we deploy the resources that we have in scholarships and need-based aid in ways that are the most effective? I mean, we don't have buckets of money, we have this amount, how are we doing it? So I think having student input, I don't know where the president's going to go with that, but once the recommendations from Huron are given, I know there are going to be recommendations about how do we deploy the financial that we have. And it can be
where the best to reach out to about providing feedback.
Well, we haven't had that yet. We haven't figured that.
Definitely input will be solicited. I think just trying to figure out who and when.
Yeah, one thing I talked about with Dean Buckwalter was that, like, so I think on a lot of our hearts and in a lot of the back of our brains, we're thinking that, like, the cost of attendance is tied to enrollment. But there are deans who regularly refute that and says that has nothing to do with it. But what's hard, I think, especially for student government, is in a lot of university-wide governance decisions, students are closely involved. But with Huron and enrollment management, it feels like no student has ever gotten the opportunity to even be at the table. And I think part of the problem that's causing this disconnect is that students know so very little about enrollment management in general. And I think when you talk about the allocation of resources, it's interesting to think about whether, like, the amount we give based on merit, whether that was strategically done or whether that just happened.
And that's what we want to address.
Yeah, and I guess my standpoint from that is we can't expect students to make informed decisions on enrollment management factors when we know nothing about it. And so I hope, which you'll be gone, darn it, which you stay for like another 5 years, because when the recommendation is made, I'm sure it won't be made public, but quasi-public or.
I mean, yes, there'll be open forums.
Yeah, I hope that students are really involved at the table.
Absolutely. I can see Jordan and others being very involved in discussing implementation. Student input, Olivia, didn't you just go to one of the student input sessions? Am I making this up?
Yeah, we were all at the same one,
Okay.
but it was kind of regarding how we got recruited in K-State in that process, yeah.
So I know they also did a survey to prospective students and students who've made inquiries. It's not going to be secret, but while they're collecting data, it's more the internal structures that we have. We'll be talking about that. You will be engaged. Absolutely. Absolutely. Irregardless of who's sitting in this chair, you'll be very engaged.
She hears me make the same argument about faculty. The argument you just made is exactly the same one. You know, I typically
haven't heard it either.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
you know, they have a process, and we have to respect that. So.
I'm not saying that we ought to hear it now or that we could have.
But you will.
Yeah, yeah.
I swear to you, you will.
And that if we want to understand the correlation between cost of attendance and enrollment, which students care deeply about our declining enrollment, we're hemorrhaging students right now, and all of us really care, but none of us are equipped with the knowledge to make informed decisions based on that. And I guess administrators probably aren't either right now without that data and with that.
We're learning.
Yeah.
We're learning a lot. And Brian's absolutely right. He's been concerned that faculty senate hasn't been quite as engaged. It will come forward.
Yeah.
And there will be engagement, and we'll want to inform and be informed by you.
You sure you don't want to stay, bro? I mean, to be honest, it's hard to imagine continuing the process of TFSC and of shared governance with not knowing who the provost will be. That's just.
We've been doing shared governance
For a long time.
Yeah,
Before I got here, you'll do it
I mean, I
afterwards.
really
Just
feel
bring
Dr.
them in.
Bosco is about as committed as you can say.
He'll be
He's not
sure.
going anywhere. I'm committed. I may be going somewhere, I don't know. But I'm gonna say right.
Don't joke about that.
Absolutely. You'll,
Yeah.
you'll bring the new provost in very, very well.
All right. Any other discussion on this? I mean, I sense probably not much of a action on that on the discussion, and that's fine. Just want to make sure that I'm not missing anybody. What do you think, Brett?
Nothing. Very happy.
Cool. Sounds good. I'm glad to have you. All right. With that, real quick, I kind of, now that we have our votes and stuff and we've certified, or whatever you want to call them, approved the process for the CTCs, Jonathan and I will get cracking on all of that writing, which would be great, and we'll have it to you here for a review of that. I'd like to say by next Tuesday. Jonathan, you want to hold our feet to the fire on that? Sounds good, buddy.
Just yell at you, Jonathan?
Yeah, Jonathan, did you say you'd write it for us?
I think you do. Do you have him muted?
No, he's muted. I hope I don't have him muted. Oh, boy, Jonathan, you lied, buddy? Well, he's been texting. He's okay. He's okay. He'll be okay. What's that? Oh.
He's there. I mean, he's unmuted now, but.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing is, I don't. The technology. I don't really. It's not really my thing, and as a result, we're having a little bit of challenge here. So. All right. So next on the agenda is tuition scenarios discussion, and you bet.
Can I at least, oh, James, go.
I was gonna suggest that we table that because we're in a pretty process oriented mindset.
No, you
right
bet.
now, and
You bet. That's we're not discussing tuition
Sure.
scenarios. I just wanted to. Yeah.
Like real high level, like, why are we almost the end of April and we're middle of April? Still don't know. What's going on? So just wanted to share, we had a really good discussion Friday at the SU's governmental relations meeting. And it came clear that there are legislators who intend or would like to restore the reduction. So, okay, let me go back. The Board of Regents requested restoration of the 2017 budget cut, which for Manhattan campus was about 5%. Overall for K-State, it was 4%. We've got part of it restored in 18 and 19, but there's still a gap. It's a little under $5 million for the university. And so we're hearing that there are legislators, when they return this April 26th, that there is interest in restoring that funding. And if they do that, there has been some discussion that we would keep tuition at very low or at zero. And so what I've been doing is doing some math. I've got it all done. I'm going to share with the provost and the president kind of what we're looking at. Because if we can get full restoration, we really think that we can keep tuition at zero. The rate increase.
Can I?
Oh my God. But let me share my concern with Sarah. Because when we did that before, the board looked at fees. And so looking at where we are with privilege fee, I think is at a 3%. So I need to get some guidance from board staff. Is the board going to have an expectation that everything is zero? You know, that's where, because that's kind of what happened a couple of years ago when they set caps. And so we're just still trying to figure out what expectations are. What does the board expect to see from universities, you know, if this should happen, and where are we as we're trying to finalize, privilege fee
And
budgets.
Fran and Jen did share that with me, so I was.
Fran
really
did, so
excited.
because you didn't jump up and get shocked, so you were aware of that. So hopefully, we're just trying to get some guidance of how we can move that forward. And then, it's possible the legislature doesn't fund 100%. They could do, 50%, and what would we do? So there's just some strange things still happening, and they'll come back on April 26th, and hopefully they'll wrap up by May 4th. And so, according to what they've already all agreed to, they have to. Of course, they can change that, but anyway, so that's where the timeline. So everything has gotten shoved back. I'm hoping next meeting to at least bring back scenarios, because we're still not going to know what the legislature is going to do. I'm hoping to get a little more input from the board and what their expectations are, at least from board staff. And so that we can figure out what to do with privilege fee and things like that. But I at least wanted to kind of share with you all where we are in the process and what we're waiting on. And we're going to work very hard to keep that tuition rate % as low as possible. I've had conversations with the vet med, the dean, and she's very interested in doing the same thing because of cost, and then also with Polytechnic and Olathe. So we're still working through that, but hopefully we'll at least come back with this committee and share some scenarios. If this happens, we would recommend this and that type of thing. You have a question?
Yeah, I was just gonna add on that I intern at the Capitol and I go to Approps every day. And Waymaster, actually a full restoration is not on the table. It'll be about 1 to 2% restoration of those heads. So is what he's thinking. Right
A
now.
1 or 2% of what they still owe us?
Is 1 to 2%.
Or is
restoration.
See, this is so confusing. Or is he wanting to restore another %?
Another %. Because it's already been restored, but of what is left.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then are other legislators going to agree with that? And will there be more pressure to do more? I mean, it's a whole process that is complex and difficult to get everyone to agree. But appreciate knowing that.
As you're having those conversations, if you could just be sure that the legislators and the board know what that privilege fee increase is for, mental health, healthcare on campus.
Yes, sir. We itemized everything out in our proposal once we get that information from the privilege fee committee, so they see exactly what's being funded.
They would ask us if we
what's
didn't.
not.
But,
I mean, that's part of
awesome.
Appendix H. So that's been part of the process for 5 years.
Fran and Jen are awesome. They actually have a lot of it done. So
yeah.
That's
yeah.
cool.
That's great.
All right.
All
All right. So is there anything else you wanted to mention with that, or kind of looking to next week where we'll have?
Yeah, we'll have some more details.
Cool. Sounds great.
Because in our last meeting is May 2nd, right? So we'll.
Yes.
When are you planning to meet then?
I
mean, really, we're going to have it kind of figured out by next week, because if I have to get the proposal in by May 4, I'm trying to. They said May 2nd, but I'm trying to get them to delay it to the 4th. But anyway, we may have some more time.
Yeah, I guess, and we're still good on time for fees if we have all that done by the 24th, essentially, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
we can talk more schedule and stuff, but
that's you.
Okay. So you started to put you on the spot again, but I know that last week we had talked about the fee review process. Provost Mason just kind of for kind of discussion in here. We talked more about we went ahead and met with the internal auditor, looking at what our options are there. I know we had a discussion about whether that's what we want to do. And Cindy had mentioned that, perhaps what we were looking for doesn't need to go through that big of a process in terms of being able to do a lot of that internally. So I just wondered if I could kick it over to you for a second on that.
So I failed.
No, and that's totally. That was a big deal. I didn't know if you.
I did not have a chance to look at that. So just to kind of share with the provost, what I recommended after listening to what they were looking for was that we can go into the accounting system, and if they expense out of a project, because it is tracked, revenues tracked separately, and as long as they don't transfer it out to their accounts, then we can just run a expense, revenue and expense report, and it'll get the expenditure categories and say salaries and whatever they're expending on, and we can just share that with them as part of the review process.
We could ask that they not transfer it out, but they keep it all in there so that it's in one place for you to find. I don't think anybody's gonna have any problems with that.
And that's really what we do with the, what's in the tuition, the instructional support allocation, that we ask the colleges to keep it on one account and we can run reports off it, same thing.
I think that might work better than the internal audit because it's simple. You can look at it, you'll know where they said they were going to spend it, and you'll see, did they do that or not?
Yeah.
I think that's great.
So that's kind of what came up, and I forgot.
No, that's
sorry. I was even
no
getting
worries.
the wonderful minutes and said, oh, and didn't get it done. So
No worries. I should make
I'll
sure
add that to next week.
that'd be excellent. Well, I know we had, and can I have the last we have 5 minutes? We're at 7:30 on the dot. Is that okay with everybody? Okay. So, sorry, James. So, as we've talked about new proposal process, I want some signature, some like what's the top level? Like we got 3 things that we got to improve. Like I'm not gonna write on the board. Nobody can read it. Like 3 things that we have to improve with the process. Like what's? I was gonna say. Like I wonder what those things are, just to kind of get some ideas flowing. Because I think that in order to make the decision on how we can improve the process, we got to know what exactly the areas for improvement need to be.
Our fee review process or our process?
No, sorry, our proposal process.
Yeah, okay, so TFSC, CTC.
TFSC, CTC.
All those things,
Okay.
yeah.
So my number one area for improvement, sorry, I want to hear from everybody, of course, but I was going to say, to start off, is that CTCs are designed to discuss and deliberate, not to sell it to TFSC. That's my interpretation of what they should be. Could be wrong.
Can you even read that?
I
I
can
can
read
just
it.
write it on a piece
Yes.
of paper.
Let's try it.
Deliberate. Just
I
go
can't
for
read
it.
it.
Aye.
No, I can read it. I do.
Like, if you stood up and volunteered, I'd give
I know, I
huge
know,
amounts of
sorry.
credit.
It's hard being a teacher, isn't it?
Well said, well said.
So when I thought I wasn't going to be here, and I wasn't here last Tuesday, I
Oh,
wrote.
yes, sorry, I should have.
So I wrote a letter that was hopefully going to get sent out to all of you. It didn't.
Well, because I
yeah.
did not expect we would get that far this week. I thought.
I think
Yeah.
did you reply all of them? I think we all should have it.
Oh, you do? I don't know. But so I outlined a lot of the concerns that were voiced in the room tonight. So it's just an idea of having this. So my biggest thing, and it's the thing I spend the most time in this 2-page thing talking about, is I think CTCs, yes, they need to be informed on what their role is, but I think they provide a lot of context when it comes to the merits to that particular program and what sort of benefits might come from that. I think TFSC offers more than just process consideration. TFSC looks at land grant affordability, and to be very honest, with the performance of the CTCs or DTCs or whatever we want to call them, even with giving them a lot of needs-based scholarship information, seeing the closeness of the minds between those committees and the deans, I don't think that will change from year to year. The way that they just look solely at mainly at the merits, the way that they look at the way students voted in referendums about whether or not to have a fee. So I think TFSC offers more than just process, but I'll leave that alone. And then, so like half a page in my document talks about the different gatekeepers. There's the college dean, there's the provost, there's CTC, and I think TFSC is one of those as well. I think it has more to offer than the role it played this year. So that's my number one.
I'll kind of add on.
all that?
No. I'll make sure.
So you talked about closeness of the mind, and I think part of that comes from how we select the CTCs. because a lot of those colleges had a vote that wasn't 100%, yet their CTCs came forward as 100%. And so looking at how we can establish a CTC that's truly representative of their college or their department, how we decide to go forward with that.
Appointment selection process.
Did we ever find out why there wasn't a was there, because they said there wasn't a multicultural student on that.
On the human ecology one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They don't have a college committee. And so they didn't know what to do. I don't know.
They don't have college.
They don't
Yeah.
have a college committee on.
College specific, they don't have college specific
College
multicultural student.
Or departmentally specific
Yeah.
one, so. Yeah, I don't know.
We read through his email, but like that was the gist of it. Trent, is that, and that's something that Dean Buckwalter said. Like, it's not going to work for. He said even your college process is not going to work because there's not a human ecology specific multicultural student organization.
Yeah.
I think just the idea of, I think Stephen had hit on it, but not being restricted to only looking at the process. I don't think to overtake the CTC's role, but having more of a say on the weeds of what we're looking at, I think is important.
I think the role that this committee did in the past was if TFSC voted negatively on a fee, it didn't go farther than TFSC. I think that it doesn't have to be that way. I think CTC can vote, I think TFSC can vote, and it's like legislative review or judicial review. Each of those opinions are attached, and a vote is a part of expressing that particular opinion. So if TFSC were to vote negatively, let's say on engineering or one of these human ecology, it wouldn't stop the process. It doesn't have to be like it was before.
So Stephen, and like I said, I'll send out Stephen's letter. I intentionally didn't send out because I knew we weren't going to get this far last week. So Sarah, what's up there now?
We have 4.
Cool.
Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
One of them is read Stephen's letter.
Cool. I'll send that out.
Sorry, I've done a lot of writing this semester.
Other thoughts that are not up there that we need to think about?
I would add sorry.
No, go ahead.
If department fees, we've kind of moved that along in a sense. And I know we'll probably discuss that more, but I think we've talked a lot about gatekeepers, and I definitely don't want to infringe on, those people that are those gatekeepers, but I think just to have some type of idea for this committee to say, okay, what's that process kind of look like within College of Human Ecology that took it to the dean. Not to say that we need to have our hands in everything, but just to know that there has been some type of fair process followed for all departments if department fees are coming forward, that those were heard by the dean and taken into consideration. Just in my mind, that helps me visualize everything.
It's harder to do when you're in arts and sciences.
Right,
college.
right.
Yeah,
That's true.
And that's
being fair and equal to all of them.
And that's something that we were, somebody said something about business, that business departments aren't separate really. Engineering, not necessarily. Arts and sciences, everybody on this campus takes classes in arts and sciences. So if they came forward with a departmental fee or something like that, how do you deal with that?
I don't mean necessarily TFSC governing like how that dean goes about it, but just some type of general understanding between deans in this committee. That makes sense. I don't know what that would look like exactly, but
I'm not quite sure how to put my comment into words, but it kind of builds on Olivia's. If we had, and I don't know if we would have caught it, but if we had just taken all four proposals, sat and just looked at them and thought, what are the big ticket questions? Would we have come up with, oh, this is a departmental fee. Maybe we need to have a discussion about, could there be a 30,000 foot level review by TFSC? I don't guarantee we'd find everything, but maybe we would have.
Well, you bet. And I think that we tried to do that this year. So that's a great point. I think that's something that Jessica and I talked about starting last year, where we wanted to sit down and discuss the fee before the deans came presented so we could have them answer questions while they were here, save them a step. But it's like even in that process, we didn't flag the big issue. Yeah.
I'd say data, you can get it. Like,
Data.
yeah, a lot of what I have questions about when it comes to these things is, so this said department wants to increase it by this much. What impact does that potentially have? You know what I mean, on those students, and how does that relate to other programs that they're competing against? You know what I mean, all that, so you can provide more context around versus we need this much for these things. You know, so I think it's trying to provide more, I guess, than what the ask is, I guess.
Is that a financial review or more quality? When you're talking
Comparison
about
to
if
peers?
It could be, I mean, it could be peers. I mean, I don't know if enrollment management is going to give some more data, you know, that's more granular at a department level, saying, you know, this is how, you know, you can see students that are, you know, not making it through, you know, at the sophomore, junior level here. It seems like it's cost related, you know what I mean? And so any of those sorts of things, I guess.
Yeah, and we will have data by departments
Okay.
and data by colleges, so that could be helpful.
I think, I don't think it's that for this group to have to sort through it, but I think it could be something that's part of the application process, and, you know, how they're putting forward and say, this is why, you know what I mean, we have a fee and this is the data, you know, that either supports or doesn't support, you know what I mean, the requested when we do.
We've got a good start there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good start. I think that what we should do is, part of it's going to be helpful to, I guess, a comment that Stephen had said in February, and that, you know, say now, is that we got to be clear that we have not a draft and stuff like that. And, you know, one of the things, sorry, and I can go right in, is timeline, because we had, like, in the, which is interesting that timeline gets brought up, because when we had sent the document we sent to Dean saying we're in our new process, Dean Dawson actually called me and said, hey, so the timeline's off here. We're supposed to be getting this process started in November. So, yeah. Now, that's understood. We couldn't have started any earlier this year. But Provost Mason, I mean, what do you think about you know, moving it up? Is, I know February 1st has been what it's been.
Just a decision made. A decision made in the fall semester, early fall semester.
Right.
This is the new deadline. You know, whether that's before Christmas, January 5, February 1, as it is now, just decide so people know.
I think what would help this also is that Jordan and I are going to get together and look at some scheduling, because especially as we talk about auditing and things like that, that's going to be, some of that stuff's going to need to be planned here in April before that even, I mean, is going to go, because then you have to think about Senate. I mean, if we move everything up early, that's great, but there are ramifications there to follow. So, all right, well, this is very helpful. Lot to discuss. So I guess for next week, same time, same place, we'll talk about tuition. We have primary objective, and then Jonathan and I will be able to present our draft for fee write-up. And I'd like to, I'll send everybody, I'll send Stephen's email here in like 2 minutes, so you have it all to kind of munch on this week.
Not that it's the end-all solution, but it's just something to start discussion from.
Right. And some general stuff on here. So, all right.
Jonathan's a lot more verbal next week.
I was gonna say.
Often quiet.
Jonathan said he's gonna write everything for us. It's gonna be awesome. He did text me back and then said I'll tell him to write it. So. All right, thanks everybody.
Thank you.